We're going to talk about 5 things you need to know before you start your DIY garage floor epoxy. If you don't know what you need to watch out for, doing this project wrong could cost more money to fix than it could to actually do it the first time. Having a floor that doesn't stick, or worse, doesn't even cure, meaning that it doesn't dry or harden, can leave you with a massive mess that you have to clean up or pay somebody to get rid of. Now, real quick before we get started, there's plenty of videos out there showing you how to do it. This is not one of those videos. This is to give you knowledge so that before you decide to tackle this, you can know the behind the scenes potential issues and costs that can come up with a project like this. We're going to talk about prep, what you need to do to the concrete before you can actually apply the epoxy. We're going to talk about safety, some of the do's and don'ts to make sure that you can stay healthy and safe. We're also going to talk about longevity. How long can you expect a floor like this to last? Time. How much time is it actually going to take from the time you move out of the garage until the time that you move back into the garage? We're also going to talk about the true cost, like not just the kit, but how much is it going to cost to really be able to do this job well and get it taken care of with the right tools and the right prep. Now, there's a lot of people out there that could get a project like this done no problem. But for those of you that are inexperienced with some things like this, hang around until the end of the video and I will have an extra tip that can help anyone that's nervous about tackling this project. So for the rest of this video, we are going to assume that we're tackling a 2-car garage, roughly 400 square foot, using an average DIY kit from a big box store. The time, the cost, everything that we're doing is going to be based off 400 square foot. If you've got a bigger or smaller project, just adjust from there. All right, first let's talk floor prep. Your floor will need to be prepared if you want anything to actually adhere to it or stick to it. It's like if you're going to paint or stain wood, if you don't sand it first, it's not going to last. And the difference between this and wood is you're going to be driving on this and working on this. So the adhesion is a big factor. You really want it to bond onto that concrete so that as you're working, you're not just peeling it right off. Don't be the person that just sweeps out their garage and goes for it. If you do, everything else is basically going to be a waste of time and money. You're going to want to check the concrete for any moisture issues. If you have too much moisture in your concrete, then as soon as you put down your epoxy floor kit and it cures, it's basically going to peel up. If there's too much water in the concrete, it's going to act kind of like grease in a pan before you cook. It's just not going to let it adhere, no matter how well you clean it. You can do this a few different ways. The cheapest and easiest way is to just get a square of plastic, put it down on the floor, and put tape on all 4 edges. Make sure that there's no air gaps or anything to where the air can escape. And you're going to leave that down for 48 hours. You're going to come back and check it. And when you do, you're going to visually look and see if there's any moisture showing on that plastic. You can peel it back, feel it, look at it. But if you're using like clear plastic, it's pretty easy to usually see. If there is moisture, just stop. Do some more research, find out what you need to do, but you do not want to waste any money on a floor that's got moisture issues by just going ahead and putting it down anyway. It won't work. Another thing that you can do is you can actually use what's called a calcium chloride kit. You can get them off of Amazon, follow the instructions, and you can do those. It's a little bit more precise than just throwing down some plastic. One of the best ways to test moisture in your concrete is to use what's called a moisture meter. Now, this is a specific instrument calibrated and designed to test the moisture in the concrete slab. It's going to give you the most accurate results. The problem is they start on the low end at about $500 and they just go up from there. So unless you know somebody that actually has a moisture meter, you're probably not going to go down that route. After you've made sure that there's no moisture problems in the concrete, you're going to need to prep it. We're going to talk about 3 different ways. The first one that I'm going to talk about is acid etching. So this is going to use acid to etch the surface for better adhesion. Now, acid etching is the lowest grade of what people might consider real prep. The entire point is to remove oil and contaminants and rough up the surface. So Acid etching will do this to a degree. It's definitely better than nothing. Now, the acid typically comes in the DIY kits from the big box stores, but be sure to check just to make sure. This also might require the floor to get pressure washed first, which is awesome because sheetrock and wood trim love getting wet. No, they don't. They really don't. You could mess up a lot of things. So just be careful. Don't get anything wet, especially like electrical panels and outlets. You may want to plastic off all the trim in a sheetrock before you start. Next, we're going to talk about the two that I would actually recommend for the best adhesion, and that's going to be grinding and shot blasting. With grinding, you'll be using diamond wheels to remove the same oil stains and anything else that's stuck to your floor. It's going to scratch everything up way better than the acid. At a bare minimum, you would need a hand grinder, a diamond wheel, dust shroud, and a vacuum to collect the dust. So if you decide to skip the vacuum portion of this and just give it a go, it would be bad. You're going to smoke out not only your garage, but potentially your neighborhood. And the silica that you would be breathing in that dust is extremely hazardous for your health. So just don't do it. Next up, we've got shot blasting. Shot blasting is another very aggressive way, like grinding, to prep the floor. It's going to do an amazing job, but more than likely, most people out there aren't going to have a shot blaster. So it's probably the least available way to do it unless you decide to rent the tools. You're also going to need to make sure that you've got a vacuum that goes with it and the shot that goes in it. But they will prep the floor to a pro level as long as you know how to use one. All in all, prep is extremely important. Just make sure you get the concrete prepped very well so that you can have good, long-lasting adhesion on your floor. Next topic is safety. This is a big one because you want to make sure and protect yourself, others around you, as well as your own. You're going to be working with chemicals, fumes, and potentially flying debris. Pressure washers, grinders, vacuums, shot blasters, all those things are very loud, so you want to make sure and use ear protection. Foam earplugs are usually the cheapest option to help with the noise cancellation. There are more comfortable options, it's just they're going to be more expensive. Some people are going to say, I've got noise canceling headphones. That's great, but what noise level are they actually rated for? And the last thing that you do not want to do is just don't be the person that I'm just going to throw in my regular old headphones with no noise cancellation. I'm just going to crank the volume and I'm going to drown it out with noise. That's just not the way that you want to do this. Use proper ear protection. Take care of your ears. You shouldn't work with epoxy without using gloves and a respirator. Most epoxies have harmful fumes that come off and you don't want to breathe them. Plus, when you work with anything that creates concrete dust, you absolutely want to wear a respirator. If you're going to be putting down epoxy and you're going to be prepping by grinding, you might as well get the filters that are rated for the concrete dust and for the epoxy fumes. As you're doing this whole project, just make sure and wear the proper PPE. It's just protective personal gear, protective glasses, goggles, closed-toed shoes. Don't run around in sandals or flip-flops unless you feel like losing a toe. Just make sure and protect yourself. Also keep in mind that fumes will continue to develop as the floor is curing, so you're going to want to make sure you have everything arranged so that you don't have to close the garage door. If you do close the garage door, you have the possibility of the fumes coming into the home, and that's not a good thing. The fumes that come off of epoxies are also flammable, so you might want to keep a fire extinguisher around. You want to keep open flames away from the epoxy, and you don't want to smoke around them. Another safety tip that's post-install, this is going to be when you go to use it. The DIY epoxy kits that you get from the store, they can be pretty slippery. Just keep that as a consideration. There are things that you can add to the epoxy before you put it down if slipping is a concern. Just be aware that when you pull in after the rain and all the water comes off of the car and it lands on the floor, it's just going to sit on top of it. So it's going to create a slick surface. You can add things into it that give it more of a textured grit. This decision needs to be made before you start the project. It's going to be much more difficult and cost a lot more money to add it after the project's finished than it will before you start and just decide to add it in from the beginning. Longevity. How long can you expect the floor to last? This is going to depend on basically everything. If you go through the process correctly and you prep everything the right way and you take care of it, you could potentially get a floor that's going to last 5 to 10 years. When a floor's not done correctly, I've seen them start failing as soon as people start using them. What do you consider lasting to mean? Are you wanting the floor to look perfect for its entire life? Or are you okay with some scratches and some damages and some spots peeling up and things like that? When we go out and look at a bunch of floors and someone has said, yeah, this floor's lasted 7 years. It's got spots that are peeled up. It's got some scratches. Some of the spots have been stained and other spots have been damaged by the sun, so they're all discolored. If you're a little bit of a perfectionist or a little OCD, you may want to look at getting this professionally done just to hold up to your expectations better. Another thing that could affect how you feel about its longevity is a thing called hot tire pickup. As soon as a car drives in after a hot summer day and the tires are super hot, you can pull in, park overnight, and when you leave the next morning, it's going to take that epoxy with it. It's just going to melt it up onto your tires and take it out of the garage, and now you've got a spot in your floor. Now, epoxy is going to protect a concrete floor, but epoxy can also get stained. Most of your DIY kits don't come with a top or a clear coat to seal them in. They're just going to come with one layer of epoxy, and then they're going to have some of the color flakes. That epoxy can still actually stain. You can get tire marks in it that are going to stain, and you can get oil stains and other things like that. If you want it to last longer and those things are going to bother you, you might also want to consider putting down a clear or a top coat. It's the same thing, it's just different terminology, but you may want to put one of those down to help protect the layer of epoxy to keep it looking better. The DIY kits don't come with a top coat or a clear coat. They just come with one layer of epoxy and a small amount of flake. The flakes are just scattered around the floor, and they're basically there to add a small amount of traction as well as break up the one big open area of just a solid color. If you don't put a top coat on and seal those in, over time, as you're blowing out the garage or sweeping it out, some of those flakes are going to come with it. That's just part of it. If you decide to go ahead and put a clear coat on top to seal everything in, to protect the layer of epoxy as well as keep the flake sealed in, make sure before you start the project that you read all the manufacturer instructions, because there's usually a window of time that you have to stay within for it to adhere. If you miss that window of time, then you're going to have to add an entire step, which is going to be sanding the entire floor and then cleaning it up and then putting it on. Just be aware to pay attention to that. You will have spots over time that do separate and bubble up. It's just going to happen. How many or how few of these you have is really going to go back to how well you prep or if you had any moisture issues to begin with. Fading. Epoxy doesn't hold up to the sun. The sun rays are going to yellow and fade the epoxy. Even if you put a clear over it that's UV stable, meaning that the clear is not going to yellow, the UV can still penetrate down into the epoxy and yellow it. If you have a section of it that goes outside of the garage door, the part that stays inside of the garage where the door closes is going to be protected. The part on the outside is not. And whenever you open up the garage door, you're going to see an extreme difference right there. You'll definitely see a difference within a few months. Number 4, how long is it going to take? If you're working alone, this could take a couple of weeks, so have a plan. Do you need to clean out a messy garage, or is it already empty? Do you know where to store everything? For sake of argument, let's just say a weekend to get everything out. If you decide the acid etch route, you tape up and plastic off all the walls, then pressure wash and or just acid etch. That could take a day. Then you're going to want to wait a minimum of 48 hours and have the right environmental conditions for all of that moisture to dissipate before you move on. If you grind the floor, you could spend 4 to 8 hours just on the grinding if you're doing it by hand. Some floors are harder than others. If you've never done this before, good luck, because you might want to actually spend the following day just in recovery. You do have the option of renting a walk-behind grinder, which can save your back and save a lot of time spent on grinding the floor. But that's also going to be something that adds a significant cost to getting this floor done. Using a shop blaster is great, but as we talked about earlier, most people aren't going to have one, which would make this a rental. That's going to add the time to pick it up, coming home, figuring it out. The prep this way can be great, but it's probably the least user-friendly option for anyone that's never run one. So all in all, let's say between 1 and 3 days just on the prep work. Applying the epoxy. If you're only putting down the epoxy and the flakes that came with the kit, and you're not going to add a clear, this step should really only take an hour or two. If you're not adding a clear, then you can figure about 3 to 7 days for this to cure. Make sure and follow the manufacturer's specifications. That brings us up to about 4 to 10 days, not including the time it took to clean out the garage. If you are going to add a clear or top coat to the epoxy, make sure you read the instructions before you start the project. You might need to apply them within a certain window of time. If you do need to put it on within 24 hours, then maybe you want to put the epoxy down on a Saturday and put the clear down on a Sunday. Depending on the manufacturer's specifications for the clear, this could add another 3 to 5 days for it to cure before you can get back on it. So all in all, from the time you start prepping the garage until you can get back on the floor, we're currently looking at about a 7 to 15 day event. This is not including the time it's going to take you to clean out the garage or move back in, because that's going to be different for everybody. Make sure that you did your moisture testing before you moved anything out of the garage. That way you didn't waste any time before you got started. Something else important to take into consideration is that some of the manufacturer recommendations for the DIY epoxy kits say that they should be installed when the concrete and the air temperature is roughly between 60 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. If this is something that you can't achieve, you might want to do some research before purchasing the product and before you actually try to install it. There are other options out there that can go well beyond these temperature ranges, but a lot of those are limited to professional installation. Keep it in mind so you know what you're getting into. Finally, what could this actually cost you? Like real cost, not just what the kit costs. So a typical epoxy DIY kit is going to be around 180 bucks. Clear coat DIY kit's going to be around 190 bucks. Plastic, you can probably get around 10 to 20 bucks. Painter's tape, 6 to 10 bucks. 3-inch disposable brushes, those are going to be a couple of bucks each. If you don't have an actual roller pole, you're going to need one of those. You can probably get one for about 20. The head that goes on the end of the pole that holds the roller is going to probably be about 20 to 25 bucks. The roller itself, I recommend that you get a 3/8 inch nap roller for most of these projects that are 18 inches. Those are going to be about 10 bucks a piece. You're going to need a drill to mix the epoxy. Those are going to start somewhere around 100 bucks or more. You're going to need a paddle mixer. You could probably get one for about 10. Something to mix in, like a 5-gallon bucket, say 5 bucks for that. If you don't have a vacuum for the shop, that's probably going to be around 100 bucks or so. Don't use your indoor vacuum for any of this. You're going to ruin it. If you decide to go the HEPA filter route, those are going to be about $75 or more. A 7-inch hand grinder is going to be between $100 to $300. A dust shroud for that grinder is going to be somewhere between $65 to $125. Then you're going to need a diamond wheel. Those are going to be anywhere between $60 and $100. A box of nitrile gloves, that's going to be about $20. Your respirator is going to be about $25. The filters for that respirator are going to be another $25 or so. You're going to need eye protection, $7 to $10. You're going to need ear protection, starting around $5 and just going up from there. Then you've got knee pads starting at around $15 for a pair. They could go up to $50 plus depending on how nice of a set you want. You're also going to want to have disposable rags. You really don't want to use paper towels. They don't work too well for this. They don't hold up to it. You need something that's a little more durable. That's probably get that for around $15. You're going to want to pick up a quart of acetone just for any spills, because if you get any drips where you're not supposed to, you're going to have to scrub them off, and you don't want to ruin your driveway just because of a drip. At this point, we're at about $900 to $1,200 with the cheaper options and no rentals included. And don't forget, you're roughly at about 7 to 15 plus days that you're going to be out of the garage while you're getting this done. We didn't talk about any types of repairs. So if you have cracks or pitting, that's something else you want to prepare for that's going to add a little bit of time as well as money to the project. One thing that can help save you some money, obviously, is if you have any of the tools already, then you're just that much further ahead. So those are the 5 topics I wanted to cover for you in this video. Just remember that doing this right is really what's going to make your floor last. Each thing that you skip or decide not to do, you're at risk of either hurting yourself or potentially hurting your floor or your home. It's not just about how great it looks when it's finished. I mean, It kind of is. We also want to make sure that it's going to look good in a week, in a month, and in 2 years. For everybody that's still watching, in the beginning, I promised that if this all seems a little bit overwhelming, we'd have another option for you to consider. So you don't have to do this for yourself. You can always hire a professional to do it. To do a job like this correctly, it takes a lot. If you do your research and find a reputable company, the results can be amazing. You will want to make sure to ask specific questions. How long have you been in coatings? What materials do you use? Do you apply a top coat? What kind of material do you use for that top coat? What kind of warranty do you offer? Check out their reputation. You can check out Google, Facebook reviews, Yelp, the BBB. You can find a great reputable company by just doing a little bit of research. You have the option of getting a much higher quality floor for a little bit more money and a lot less of your time. To do this, just go to Google and either search concrete coating in my area or epoxy floor in my area. Plus, the pros have access to higher grade materials. Depending on your area, you could get this done for as low as $4 to $5 a square foot. Now, the $4 to $5 a square foot guys may be using the same materials that you could purchase off the shelf at one of the box stores. Once you get in the range of about $6 to $8 a square foot, you should be working with a company that is using higher grade materials. This means that you could get the job done professionally by a company using higher grade materials for between $2,500 to $3,500, depending on your area. And they could potentially get the floor installed in a day. So all you would have to worry about is move out and move in. On the higher end, some projects do require extensive work and a lot more repair materials. For those floors, you could get as high as anywhere between $12 to $15 a square foot, but really it's just going to depend on how much work you've got to be done. If you go out and look at your area, you should have a pretty good idea of how much repair you need to get done. Cracks, pitting, and damaged areas should be repaired as part of the professional process. If someone is not going to repair those, you should question that. So for everybody that stuck with me all the way through to the end, thank you so much for your time. If you're still interested and you're going to take this project on and get it done, man, kudos to you. I'd love to hear about your thoughts on this process in the comments. My name's Corey. I work with LS Concrete Coatings, and we service the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex here in Texas. I know there's a lot of confusing things that go on within our industry that consumers don't have much access to the information. So I'm going to start trying to put out some more content that's going to help clear up some of those things. That way people can have a better understanding of it. If that's something that interests you, or if you think that this video could help someone else, please feel free to like it, share it. If you want to subscribe to the channel, we don't have much content on here right now, but we're going to start trying to add to that. So if you subscribe and hit the notification button, then you can get notified whenever we release some more content. Y'all have a great day.